and welcome back to another episode of V-Road, CCTCG's weekly Vanguard podcast. I'm Cole.
I'm Trey.
And this week we've got a lot more of a chill video for you. Last one was really long, and there was a lot to go into, but this one is going to be a lot more casual and a lot more budget-friendly because I think this game is probably the cheapest card game you can play, especially for like dollars to power level. There's so many decks in this game, especially in standard, that like you don't need to spend a lot of money on, and you get like a really solid, tight package out of that doesn't feel like cheap or it can't win a game at all or anything like that.
Yeah. Last week's video definitely put on the pressure for a lot of discussion. We actually have a couple decks to discuss today that are not on that tier list that we didn't get to cover, just because there was so many that we felt that we did need to cover. But we do feel that this game has so many available options for all budget levels and competitiveness. So taking some of these lesser played decks in the current format and, playing them through, as long as you know your cards and, have a little bit of luck on your side, I mean, you're able to win any sort of game with these kind of decks.
Yeah, to me, this episode is mostly to raise awareness for these decks, because I think a lot of them you'll probably just like call pet decks and write them off, but there are as many times as a tier 1 deck can low roll and just lose, is as many times as these decks can not even necessarily just high roll, just medium roll enough to win out when you think they really wouldn't, just because they're maybe older or don't feel like they should be doing what they do, but they can push it out. And up front, we're gonna capture all of these in like one go. The startup trial decks, there's a lot to be said about like the fact that these decks out of the box, you need to upgrade every card in them besides like the boss, and I am kind of mixed on that approach to it. I like that it really heavily like kind of forces you to learn how to upgrade a deck, especially if you're like a new player, but at the same time, it can be kind of unnecessary to limit the player that much when they're learning and force them to have to buy products just to learn like what certain skills are and like how they show up in a game and all that. But at the very least, these things are supported every set, especially in like set 4. So they're not too bad after you get them all filled out, especially because they're so generic.
Yeah. I mean, luckily having them all play towards their nation style with their main like energy blasting skill keeps it so that you still get a great idea of what that nation kind of does in a generalization, and then still has the fantastic skill of just counterblasting, searching for a persona ride, getting power. It's hard to go wrong with that. I am under the impression that I don't think these cards should have been as vanilla as they were. I think leaving some of the cards vanilla and leaving some kind of basic skills, like the grade 1 discard, call to rear guard cards, I think those could have been added in the deck, because that's a great like target. Say, hey, here's a good mulligan piece that you can like try to search for when you're writing. Gives a little bit more gameplay that can be taught through the initial little booklets and everything like that for those people, but then still leaving room for people to go out and start to improve them. Luckily, that all of the decks and the cards that go into those decks are commons or double rares, or rares, and they're all so cheap that even if you just use the cards that are specific to those decks, you could still build them out for like between buying the trial deck and everything for less than $30, which, I mean, most of that $30 obviously goes to buying the trial deck, and then some of it may go towards shipping. Like, you could probably get it for $20 if you were able to find every piece, or even get the additional upgrades for free if you know someone who has it. So I think it's a pretty decent starting spot, but could have been better.
Yeah, so the way I've priced out all of these is all of these decks that have been chosen, at least for me, I don't know about you, but all of it, and these starter decks too, all of them are in mind of like getting effect PGs and getting effect triggers like fronts and draws, just assuming you're running effect fronts and draws for the sake of argument. Not so much that you would like need effect crits rather, but also that you're getting your like nation a specific over trigger. And to me, I think with all of these decks, that included, even with the stuff in like the main deck, you're not getting like anywhere close to $100 for most of these. And while that sounds like a lot to have that as like the metric of what's cheap, I do think that still says a lot about how cheap the game is compared to other card games at the very least, you know?
Yeah, I tended to not price those out as much, just because generic triggers, they're so situational on what you want to have. Obviously, if you're gonna run draws, you want to run the effects, because just having another a card that's a 5k shield never feels great. Luckily, none of the effect triggers really are ridiculously priced, and if you're really only buying into one deck to kind of get at a starting point, or get an idea, vanilla triggers are pennies on the dollar. They're cost nothing, in all reality. So starting with vanillas is never a bad spot, and that's kind of what I was basing off of. Okay, this is getting you into the game. Vanillas are where you start, and then once you've kind of progressed into the game a little bit more and you start buying additional, more expensive pieces, that's where you kind of go. But at a base level, vanillas are perfectly fine as is.
And especially like if you already have bought one of these starter decks already, and you like the general thing of what that nation's going for, using them as like a shell to build into any of the other decks we're going to bring up is like perfectly fine, especially if your idea is to get all the normal units first and then get the effect triggers like later, when you can like all get them in one go and it's easier on your wallet. That's perfectly fine too. I know I have one of the decks coming up here that I'll mention where I don't even have effect triggers in it, but it's fine because, you know, especially in like a casual game where you might be using these decks more than like a competitive setting, until you've gotten those like effect triggers, it works just fine. There's nothing wrong with it. So going out of that to the other big group of decks I think we wanted to talk about is the glitter decks. And I think Bushiroad went out of their way to make these 5 to 6 decks pretty easy to pick up, because they were all reprinted in the triple drive booster. While like it was obvious that they kind of needed to, because some of these cards in these decks were like super old, like set 5 and set 8 of original Overdress. It helps that they've stayed so cheap altogether, and they really give you something unique to have for a playstyle for each of these nations. These are like my favorite decks to recommend to players who want something new. So
yeah, the glitter decks all luckily spread across all the nations, as being Vanguard's kind of brainchild for standard, it kind of helps out that they have this like new style of play. All of them have a very interesting and all unique play styles, which helps out a lot. Tamayura being kind of more of a multi-attack, whereas Roro is a very token-based deck that revolves around its kind of rear guards versus Vanguard. Thegria being the complete opposite of that, it focuses more on its Vanguard than rear guards. And Michu kind of doing all-encompassing, swapping some Vanguards. There's so many great things about these glitter decks, and the fact that again they can consistently have throughout the entire format gotten support, and at times have been very expensive. But if we're looking at the current kind of state of the set, like this set 2 meta where we're at right now, they're all in a fantastic, very playable spot, but for the cheap, they're easy for people to get into.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to decks like Michu, who is getting a new form to catch up with the other glitter cards in Lyrical Set 1. That deck I'm really excited for personally. it's slowly creeped up into being my favorite glitter deck. I was very big on Thegria for a while, and I think if you really like the concept of persona writing, she just can do that a bunch in one go, and the parts of that package that made that hard to afford is just so easily obtainable now. Her order, she has an order that when you persona ride, you get 15k instead of 10k, and you draw 2 instead of 1. So the fact that this deck can persona ride multiple times means you're drawing a bunch and you're getting a bunch of power, and that's really cool. That set order was really expensive for a very, very long time. Now in Triple Drive Booster, you can find it on TCG Player as on the date of recording for like $4. That's insane. It used to be like so much more. It bordered on like on like 100. But now you can pick up the whole deck for like absolutely nothing.
Yeah. Broken Toys was another one of those where it had one printing early on, and anyone who played Tomb Raider, you had to have Broken Toys. It's just too good of a card to be able to set up your soul to play the deck as you need it to. And it was up there in the 40s, 50s, 60s sometimes. Like, it was pressing up there. So to have a playset, you were pressing, you know, close to $200 for a single like playset of a card, a 4-card in a 46 deck at that time. Now that it's been reprinted, it's dirt cheap in all reality comparatively. So it makes it all the better. Decks are all the glitter decks are in a fairly competitive state. Maybe not going to be like consistent winners, but as long as you can kind of work towards their mechanic, they're all very good. And we rated them pretty lowly, like kind of C tier last week. But you know, I don't think, you know, budget decks like you know, need to be really any higher than that. I think they're meant to be at a starting point where you can work your way through up the competitive scene. And if you're just playing casually, these decks are all fantastic. They're all fun to play. They all have interesting like counterplay mechanics to them, not like crazy, but enough to keep the game interesting and get you into the game to a competitive stance.
Yeah, and out of all of these, obviously, Ava is the one that is currently doing the best, especially with its promo and just what it wants to do. Has always been the most solid out of all of these decks, and that even that one is like not that expensive if you do not count its newest promo. I picked up the deck for like, I want to say like $30 or something, and then, you know, we had the promo in circulation for almost 2 months now, so hopefully you can find it for at least something reasonable, like $20 or $30. I think if the whole deck is fairly cheap and you just have to spend an annoying amount of money on like one card to fill out that playset and get it up to date completely, I think that's usually fine. It's like when you pick up any of these decks and you look towards like sets that are coming out, as long as like what you're upgrading into is cheap enough at like maybe like 10 or 20 or whatever, to where you can pick up a playset and be like, okay, I spent like maybe $40 or something, but like that's all I needed to get, and now I'm done, and I can just keep playing the deck with the newest stuff. I think that's fairly reasonable, but for most of these decks, I don't think we'll even get close to that. So beyond the glitter decks, we made up our own little list of decks that we like, that we want to talk about. And for me, I have sort of gotten like a weird, not obsession with this deck, but I've just been enjoying it a lot lately. I used it on, you check out our X profile with
formerly Twitter.
Yeah, formerly Twitter. We've been letting you guys know what decks we've been playing in our locals. And last week we had, or last Wednesday rather, we had our not, is it Vanguard Day? Was it another, is that what it was?
It was
yeah, right.
Constructive Cup.
Yeah, they have so many of these now. But we both played Igryandra, and that deck is ridiculously cheap for what it is. It has a pleasant thing about a lot of decks nowadays, especially in Divines, where the whole deck is just made out of the one set. You're picking up like maybe a card or two from a different set that's like a generic, and for us it's like Shenri is a really good generic. I like to run Latifa from set 11, who's also not that much, even though set 11 is fairly old now. But that's also like a build choice, so there's many ways you can go with a deck like this that's as, you know, not so restrictive as other decks we might mention. But yeah, it's just the numbers this deck pumps out is ridiculous, and you kind of go on a power trip with it, and it doesn't need to discard for its ride deck, importantly, so it's really good against Rush, and it just does so much for how much it didn't cost me.
Yeah. And like Cole said, we both played it this last week. If you do go check out our Twitter, we'll put the links down below this time. That's something we've been missing on. But if you go and look at our lists are very similar if you look at the core. But then you kind of look at our supporting cards, and we have different ideologies on the deck, and both work fine. Even in our match we played, it was a very good match. It was close. Cole ended up beating me and going on a little bit further than I did, but it was still a competitive match, and both decks felt fine. And all night, both of us played it very well, and it helps when you can throw in everything from the one set and then just throw in a couple support cards, kind of to play more towards what style you prefer. So it very much so helps when you can just kind of throw in some random generics, and you can make it as cheap of a generic as you want, or you can make it as expensive as you want. So, but for a budget deck, it is very budget.
Yeah, very solid pick. And what was your first one?
I kind of took a little step away from our main Six Nations on the first two decks I want to talk about. I kind of am including them in the same little tidbit because it's both of the decks from the Bang Dream set from set 1. Both of those decks, the Mygo and the Morphonica deck, are both very solid decks that are way underrated. I think a lot of people kind of look at them funny because it's kind of that interesting art style of having the kind of screen grabs from the game, but when you look at them, they like on paper, if you looked at them and just ignored what the card art was, and just kind of looked at the cards, they both have a fantastic skills and play in a very interesting way that keeps you engaged. The Mygo deck kind of does a little bit of everything. It has restanding rear guards once you're actually at grade 3 and you're playing the correct order to go along with it. Both of the decks have a kind of set order you have to play things. Like they have specific circle attributes for their rear guards, which is something we don't have a lot in our game. So it makes it so that it kind of can feel stagnant at times, but obviously based off of your draws, drive checks, everything still can be interesting and good. It draws, Mygo specifically, it draws a lot. Because you're really getting 3 drive checks a turn at grade 3 if your opponent's grade 3. You're restanding with a bunch of power, so you're getting 5 attacks in a turn, which as a deck in the current state of Vanguard, a 5-attack multi-drive deck is about what you would want. And it has a little bit of guard restrict. It has recuperation from board build from your bind zone. It just does a little bit of everything from a tidbit of every nation to make it interesting. It again, it kind of has one set of combos, so it can get a little stagnant, but it's competitive. It's fun. And your most expensive card, which is a 2 of in the deck, is 97 cents as of today's record. 97 cents.
It's pretty good.
Your main grade 3 boss unit, 75 cents.
There you go.
And everything is just down there from there. So in reality, if you called every card $1 in the deck, it'd be $50. That's including PGs, effect triggers, everything from set 1. Because for both of these decks, the effect triggers and PGs are cheap as can be. So, on that note, the Morphonica one as well has a very interesting playstyle. Similarly, has set orders on cards on there, but it uses more versions of the grade 3. It has 2 different forms. One that's like your base form, and another one that you kind of ride, similar to like the glitter units or a youth perk. It allows you to ride over those units. And then at the end of the turn, you re-ride your original one. And you kind of have additional PGs in that deck. Every Persona ride can essentially be ditched, and you change the attack from the Vanguard to a rear guard. So again, a pretty interesting defensive mechanic, and very, very cheap to get into.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, both are pretty solid. I remember at least my go was tier 1 in the set 13 meta.
Set 1 came out 1.
Yes, but in Japan it was set 1 in set 13. So it still has some staying power, I think. Another deck I've been enjoying recently that didn't really take much to build up was Prison, and I think with the fact that it's promo that lets you superior ride into the grade 4, the grade 4 itself being reprinted in triple drive. There might be some fringe cards people like to run from like way back in set 2, like the one that can PG against or rear guards and stuff. Like those might be a little something, but the only really expensive card in here is the new triple rare it just got in set 2, and that's like $9. And I think that is more than reasonable for what the deck does. It's really there for the people who like not a control. It's hard to say there's really a control deck in the game, but it gets as close as you want. And if you're a big fan of the anime like I am, this deck has always been enjoyable to see from that angle. But yeah, it's just honestly there isn't too much to say about it. It's one of the grade 4 decks that has had the most staying power, besides apparently Kyrie, that has been showing up in like Singapore
making
lately.
Its resurgence.
Yeah, but it having a grade 2 restander is pretty cool for the deck, and it just keeps it relevant, which is always nice to see with how they're supporting decks in this game.
Yeah, and it's just kind of an annoying deck to play against, like with how much disruptive power that it has, which we don't have a whole lot of decks. We have more coming out that are really, you have to a brain check to play against and like disrupt your own resources. Prison's been there consistently throughout all the metas. In reality, it's always kind of held its place. But yeah, it is as cheap as it's ever been. A $9 card, you can't really complain with that. So it's a great starting spot in reality.
Yeah. And after that, what do we got?
I want to talk about Silhouette. Silhouette is, I think, if I were to get into Vanguard at this moment in time and someone introduced the game to me, I would hope that this is the deck that they would introduce to me.
Wow. Okay.
Because yeah, and I don't like, as much as I love Overlord and all of that, obviously I've had history with that deck. So that's that. But if I had to introduce anyone to a deck, if someone came to me and said, "Hey, I'm getting into Vanguard, what is it?" It is going to be Silhouette. And that is specifically because it has a very interesting mechanic with its attaching arms and detaching arms. Right now, it just got honestly a promo that makes the deck infinitely better, which is only $7 as of today's recording. $7 for the promo. It is a 4 of. It enables your 5th attack and it gives power to your front row. So for your arms that already have pretty decent skills, and then you combine it to your Vanguard to give your Vanguard a big swing. It's one of those decks that kind of does a little bit of everything. It can be defensive when it needs to, because you pretty much have free recall on your arms every turn, so you can always have intercepting cards like to guard with. So extra shield on board. You don't you're not concerned about losing them. So that is one of the reasons why I would say this would be the deck that I would hope someone would introduce me to. The biggest reason after that is because in set 3 coming up, we know that there are already 3 cards coming out specifically for this deck. And so as a budget deck, we're looking at it where it stands currently, but we also want to look at it a little bit in the future too. Because this deck we know is going to go probably from a C tier deck to maybe a high B deck. It's not going to jump in a huge amount. It's not going to go from C tier to S tier like Shoujo Doji will with its new form. That's a different story. But it's getting enough new pieces that just help the deck do exactly what it wants to do, and that's attach and reattach the arms. And it gives it some pressure with a critical. It gives additional power. It gives a lot of forward movements with this deck. So yeah, maybe at this exact moment in time, it's gonna cost you $20-$30 to build. I say that for the core of the deck. The promo will cost you $28. It is worth the as a 4 playset. It's worth it for that one card, but it might cost you less than about $50 to build the entire deck, which is very, very good. And then as soon as set 3 comes out, you already have a path forward. So being in that perfect state of this is a fun, good deck, and then it improves is the reason why I think, in my list at least, I think it is the perfect budget deck in this current moment in time.
That is a good metric. I really do appreciate when the way they support decks in this game. There's always something to look forward to if you have even just a small collection of decks that you've built maybe recently, like all you 5 Barrow Magnus players out there. The fact that you're getting a new form is insane to me, and as somebody who's been playing since Overdress Set 1, at the very least, I wouldn't have expected that at all. But these days I'm just convinced that a Bushiroad will leave no deck behind. But staying in Brandgate, I am very happy to put a Welstra up here as a divine skill the Vanguard, because I think those are super fun to use, and this one is real simple and easy to understand, and it has a lot of moving parts to it, but in a good way. It's got so many different set orders that it uses to set up and mount its offense and get multiple attacks, and minus the opponent's Vanguard, which is always super unique when it shows up. It's just not very common, but it's also a great deck for beginners to learn how to use energy, or somebody who still plays but they want to try something new, something that actually uses energy and makes them think about it. And the only thing that would have stopped me from putting on this list is a grade 2 triple rare it had, and I want to say set 8, set 9, set 10, around that era of Overdress, that just got a reprint, and it's pretty affordable now, so there isn't really much holding any. Oh yeah, it's $5 now?
$5 right now.
That's ridiculous, because I remember it was at 20s for a while.
When I first pulled one, it was $42 a card.
Okay, sure. Yep.
So if that says anything.
It's running so much of its divine support too, you don't need to look too far to find it. And it's also one of those decks, especially, won't say much, but this was the day where they aired the episode where this card went up against the new Destined one for Dragon Empire. And if you like this deck and you don't watch the anime, watch the anime. It makes you appreciate decks like these that much more.
Absolutely. Yeah, this deck was actually probably, I think it was the 4th deck I built in Overdress, the original one. I originally ran it without the Fry Heights, just because I liked the whole kind of space Navy thing. After being a Maelstrom player, I had kind of the Navy general there. So it kind of was that really cool blitz mechanic of having, well, first off, the set orders that have abilities and get called to the board and do all these kinds of things. I just thought it was a crazy interesting mechanic. But yes, to include a very cheap version of it now, which for the long time it wasn't, I think it's going to help draw in players that were originally scared and timid because of it. Price obviously is a lot of factors to a lot of game players. And that's the biggest reason why we're discussing this now, because even at our local shops, there are a lot of players who don't have money to spend on cases of things and stay up with current meta. So building these decks And Welstra being, even though it's one of the newer decks, is like that perfect in between of divines, skill, cheap, perfect kind of little mesh there.
Yep. And all right, that's gonna lead into
Vermilion.
Vermilion.
I think Vermilion, similar lines to Greyandra, where it's a pretty basic deck. It has its kind of core. It all kind of came out in that set. You obviously want to run your Narukami units. You don't run as many as you used to. There are other supporting cards that are great, like its grade 3 promo that it had a couple months back, and it just got a reprint in Festival. So that price is going down too. It wasn't ever a crazy ridiculous price, but has dropped down even further and has a nice little, foiling effect now. But it's one of those decks that is, if you run it as its full base core package, is pretty decent. But it gives you enough room to be able to upgrade it and add pieces to fit more towards your playstyle. Like if you really want to focus on disruption of board, you have that ability. You already are pretty much attacking 3 units a turn from your Vanguard alone. Obviously, there are some decks now that it's kind of a bad matchup for, but in reality, you're still going to do what you want to do. And if your opponent's, less than 5 damage, you can still do the damage from its Vanguard skill. So just kind of again, another interesting mechanic where you just discard a card and deal damage, which I think is the only skill we have currently in Vanguard that does something like that, other than Welstra, where it has its new Blitz Order that does that. Or not Blitz Order,
grade 4 Nirvana. That's like
fair.
the only other one I can think
that,
of. Yeah. In standard,
so
at least.
Fun mechanic, and leaves a lot of room for upgradability. Like Latifah's that we had talked about running in Grandra earlier. It's not a crazy ridiculous card price right now, but it is a very good card that I would say is probably a 4 of. But if you don't have it, there are alternatives that you can get away with and keep it even cheaper. So it's a very good starting spot, and we'll see more support.
Yeah, my last 2, I'll just kind of bunch up together just to get them out of the way. They're both promo bosses. The first one being Petrolka. If I can say that I have a pet deck, this is it. I think it's the silliest little thing ever, and I think that these kinds of boss units are really fun and worth looking into if you want something fun to play casually that you'll just ride as your Vanguard because they don't have their own ride line. So you're just gonna have some generic ride line. They're gonna think you're playing some random thing, and then you go into this and they have no idea what it does. So you attack, you look at the top 7. This deck has to be singleton, so you're gonna show him 7 different random cards. Well, one of them's gonna be her. So because you showed him 7 different cards, you get to ride that other Petrolka, and you just get to keep attacking with your Vanguard like over and over and over for however much CB you have. And that little cycle of what it does is just hilarious to me and not hard to get at all. She recently, I believe she got reprinted in Triple Drive. I could be wrong. I know she was a kind of not hard to get promo, but like an annoyingly expensive promo for what it was. But now I think she is just like absolutely dirt cheap. And now with Chris Rain, I actually want to try a build where you play her for the first couple turns and then you go into Chris Rain just to give yourself a late game move after you've used all of your Petrolkas. So
I see what you're cooking.
It's a little cute. You'd probably run the Chris Rains as like a 2-of because you don't want to do too much. Yeah, and it's got a cute little promo grade 3 that counts as a Petrolka in the deck. So when it's revealed for her skill, you can write it instead, and it sort of functions. It's like a revel dress or whatever thing where you just go into Petrolka at the end of the turn. But yeah, no, it's just cute. It's just a cute deck. You can put absolutely whatever you want in it. You just got to keep most of, if not all of the cards to 1 copy each. And despite how that sounds, it's not terrible. But the other one is timestamping, which I also want to highlight for the fact that it's so generic. It kind of tells you exactly what it wants to do, like on the guard. And it can give itself triple drive, or it can get like you an extra attack, and it just does Dark States things. If you like Dark States, but you don't know what you want to get into, and you have maybe the starter deck, and you're just not feeling the funny Chimera guy, then pick this guy up. I think he's like $1. Actually, even less. He's like $1 for the foil.
That just got reprinted in festivals.
Yeah. So it's just, he looks cool. He scratches that like Gear Chronicle itch. He almost has enough of himself going on that I wish he had like his own ride line or something, or like his own little cards that like targeted at him, because I know they've started doing that now with some of these. But yeah, I don't know if you've touched this guy at all.
Time stepping is actually one I have a core for, and I want to finish building out, so I need to do that. But Tralka is one I haven't touched and probably won't. I say probably won't. I probably will eventually. As I know it's kind of a goofy, fun deck. It's just, to me, it's, yeah. I have a lot of random lyrical support, but I don't think I have enough to really support its true kind of menagerie of cards that it needs. But time stamping, I do enjoy, and I do wish Bushy would come out with either ride lines or 1 or 2 cards for the promo bosses that actually could, help support it in a way. It's hard to say, hey, we're gonna give a promo boss a name locked card, just because not very many people play them. But all of them are fun in their own way. Claudine being one that I have that is incredibly enjoyable as well. So don't sleep on them. They're very generic. You run a lot of basic cards. They have similar-ish playstyles to other boss units, but are unique and still very, very fun.
Yep, and for your last 2, you have, to me, some questionable ones, but I'll let you explain. Let's go into Amina Gruzio first, because that one I raised an eyebrow at when you put that on your list when you sent it to me. How do you get away with the fact that like masks are still like 10 or so bucks, and the guy that searches them in Dark States is also like a little
So I say Amina Grigio as a list because in reality, in most mask decks, you are supposed to run support cards that, call your Mask of search for your Mask of Hydrum and call a Dragon Tree marker. Amina Grigio is actually one of the decks that I don't think you need those in. As weird as that sounds, Amina Grigio's main skills, both from its grade 3 and from its ride line, for the most part, you're just searching for an Amina Grigio or a mask. So you're always searching top, I think it's 7 again, to find one of those units. And for the most part, you draw a decent amount, so you're going to find those units. It's kind of it's the only deck that is purpose built to be a mask deck. So you don't have to have those support cards. So running it in the budget version, yes, it's going to be more on the higher end of this budget list, specifically because of Mask of Hydrogram. It's about $10 a piece at this time of recording, but everything else is $4 or less for support cards. Lindalkas are like $2.53 right now at time of recording. The Orions are about $2 a card. Misery Wing Dragon's about $2 a card. So yes, a little bit more on that pricier side, but all of the generics that you run in the deck are fairly cheap. So yes, you can definitely upgrade it and add more mask support into it. Get those Dragon Tree markers, which yes are great for power. Helps with the deck. But a deck that has a fun mechanic, that is a fairly cheap deck in its own right, and doesn't have to have that support. It kind of just is going to do what it wants. Like, essentially, you can run 4 Mask of Hydrogoom. Your ride line obviously triggers PGs. The 4 Mask, Amina Grigio, and 3 of the Persona ride for Amina Grigio. And if you just ran that, you could change every other card in that deck and get away with it. Obviously, the grade 1 that counts as 2 cards when you're shoving cards of soul for your restand of Mask you really kind of want to have that. But again, it's not very expensive. It's like a dollar right now at this time of recording. So it is a goofy deck, but to get into kind of an older mechanic that is still a very good mechanic in Mask, it is, I think, like a great budget style deck because it just kind of is going to do what it wants just because of its grade 3. It just wants to do it, and it's going to do it. That's why.
A bad one, not a bad explanation. Yeah. But can you give the same defense for Zorga? I know he himself isn't that much, but I thought that RPDs and stuff were still expensive, but I guess I'm out of the loop.
No, see, similar level, it's going to be on a little bit higher end of budget decks. But as of today, this recording, Zorga Nadir himself, if again another Divine set budget style deck, again a bit more on the pricier side. Zorga Nadir is about $5 or $6 himself. RPDs, which this is mind blowing to me, is $5 a card at this time of recording. Which RPD isn't required in this set or in this deck. It is a great card, still just base 15k if you Alchemy Magic crit power, fantastic. Karmas are around $1 a piece. Shadow Cloaks, which are I think a Fora in the deck, are about $253 right now. Rogue Headhunters, kind of around that same price. I think they're more like $4 a card right now. But everything in that deck, maybe besides some orders that you could add into the deck, is less than like $4 or $5 a card. So again, a bit on the pricier side for a deck, but gives so much availability for playstyle that it's one of those, hey, I can get into Zorga, and from every set forward, I will be able to adjust this deck to kind of maintain a competitive meta stance. So again, kind of maybe a little closer to like your mid-range style decks, maybe the peak of our budget style. But at a time to get into a very competitive, not necessarily consistent, but game-winning deck, Zorga Nadir is at a price that it's just hard not to say is competitive right now, and budget worthy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough. I think that can put a nice bow on this little exposure of budget decks that I think is really important, because I do think this game is the cheapest card game you can play. Of course, yes, there are a lot of tier 1 decks. They're very expensive. You're getting into the hundreds. But that's true of every card game, and that's why the amount of decks that are in this game sort of guarantees that a lot of decks that were like good or still good just can't really get too out of hand, because people are chasing for like the most competitive decks out of sets that come out. So there's always options. But yeah. Anything else you've got about budget decks before we wrap this up?
I was gonna say, last thing, obviously these are just a couple of our recommendations of what budget decks are. We may not be 100% correct, and in reality, a week from now, these deck prices could change. I still think our stance on most of these decks will stay the same no matter kind of what their budget price is. Some cards may increase. Obviously, when support gets announced for a deck, cards tend to skyrocket in price because people are trying to get ahead of the curve so that the price isn't going to be crazy. And with that, prices increase. So obviously keep an open mind when you're thinking about it, but do some research. Get into the game, start with something like the trial deck, start with the glitter boss, enjoy the game for what it is, get into it, start getting competitive if you want. If not, continue to play it casually and, have fun building decks, because this game is perfect for it.
Absolutely. So that all being said, if you watched all the way through, thanks. Be sure to like the video if you enjoyed it, and tell us if there's any decks that you really like that you can drop in the comments and we can read, because we always enjoy doing that. But for now, until the next one, I was Cole.
I'm Trey.
And we'll see you later.